She said it with fire in her eyes and grease on her apron. "I ain't my mother, but I can cook just as good." He didn't flinch, just handed her a sack of beans and one chance. No one expected her to last a week, least of all Cole Merritt. But dish by dish, she turned that whiskey-soaked place into something no one in town could name. Until the man who broke her once came back to finish the job. And this time, she wasn't the one who would flinch. If you believe healing can taste like cornbread and come with a side of grit, stay with us. She walked into the saloon with nothing but a skillet and a spine made of quiet defiance. The wind came low and mean across the flats, stirring up a dust that whispered of old bones and unsaid things. It caught the hem of her skirt and lifted it just enough to remind her that she'd lost weight she hadn't meant to lose. Clara June sat on the back of the creaking supply wagon with her chin high and her fingers white around the handle of a dented tin pot, the only thing she owned that hadn't failed her. She had once boiled river water in it with her mother crouched beside her, whispering stories to hide the growl of their bellies. That pot had fed them in the dark, long before the bruises turned fatal and the lawmen turned their backs. Now it clanked against her thigh like a metronome, steadying her heartbeat as the wagon rolled into New Penance. The town was a smudge of buildings baked brittle under the western sun, its sign swinging by a single rusted nail. One church, 2 shops, and a saloon that looked like it had taken more bullets than prayers. Horses blinked in the heat, and flies circled slow as doubt. A little boy stared at her from the boardwalk with a jaw full of gum and eyes older than his years. Clara didn't flinch. She met every stare like a woman who'd already walked barefoot through fire. She climbed down without help, dust clouding around her boots. The driver didn't offer a farewell, just snapped the reins and disappeared down the trail with the same quiet disregard the world had shown her since she was 12. Clara adjusted her sack on her back, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the saloon. She passed a pair of men leaning against the hitching post. One whistled low under his breath. The other said, "Ain't no lady left back east?" Clara didn't break stride. She just muttered, "Not for the kind of men who need ask." The Dust Horn saloon was louder than it looked. Laughter, boots on floorboards, a piano sounding like it hadn't been tuned since Lincoln died. Clara stepped through the swinging doors and let the noise hit her like a wave. Her eyes adjusted slowly. Inside, it smelled like whiskey and pine tar. There were men at every table, smoke twisting in the sunlight. Behind the bar stood a man with arms like cedar trunks and a gaze that cut cleaner than any blade. Cole Merritt, mid-30s, rough hands, a face shaped by silence. He looked at her like a man who'd already said all the words he needed for the week. Clara stepped up to the bar, her voice steady but quiet. "I can cook. I clean after myself. I don't talk much. I need work." Cole didn't answer right away. He watched her with the kind of stillness that made lesser folk nervous. Then he nodded toward the back. "Kitchen's through there." That was all. She pushed the swinging door open and found a room full of grime and neglect. A stove crusted in black, a pan rusting in a sink full of gray water. But there was a counter, a knife, a sack of potatoes in the corner. She took off her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and started peeling. She didn't ask how many mouths. She didn't ask what was expected. She just cooked. An hour later, Cole came through the door without sound and leaned against the frame. She handed him a bowl of stew, thick, peppery, hot enough to fight back. He tasted it, chewed once, then nodded. "You'll do." That was all. That night, Clara slept in the storeroom on a sack of flour and folded her coat for a pillow. The wind scratched against the wood outside like it had claws, but inside there was warmth in the air and something like purpose pressed against her ribs. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She just stared at the ceiling and whispered, "We begin again." The mornings came early at the Dust Horn, and Clara was always the first to rise. The sun barely kissed the peaks when she was already at the pump behind the saloon, sleeves rolled, apron tied, hands red with cold water and soap. The kitchen stank of old grease and something sour that clung to the walls like regret, but she opened every window and let the desert air scour it clean. She scrubbed the floors on her knees until her arms ached, and the wooden boards showed their scars again. The pan she found rusting in the sink became silver again under her steel wool, and the old cast-iron pot sang when it hit the flame for the first time in what felt like years. At first, the men didn't notice. They still hollered for whiskey before breakfast and left boot prints across her clean floor like it meant nothing. But one by one, The regulars started pausing, smelling something new, biscuits that flaked like memory, eggs browned at the edges, bacon crisp, but never burnt. The stew was richer, the coffee stronger, the bread soft enough to tear without a knife. Cole never said anything, but he began walking a little slower through the back door in the mornings. Sometimes he lingered near the stove, watching her chop with quiet eyes. He didn't ask questions, just refilled the firewood or fixed a stubborn drawer. Clara didn't talk unless she had to. Words were something she'd once thrown like knives, but too many had come back to cut her. So she let the food speak. Each plate was a message. You're still here. You still matter. There's warmth if you want it. No one said thank you. Not at first. But the tips got heavier. The table nearest the window started sweeping their crumbs. One man left a flower, rough and wilted, on the edge of the stove. Then came Mina. The first time Clara saw her, the girl was curled under the back porch steps, knees drawn to her chest, eyes like burnt coal. 12 maybe, or younger. Dirt-streaked face, wild hair, mistrustful as a cornered animal. She didn't speak, didn't move, even when Clara set down a plate beside her. Half a biscuit, a slice of ham, 2 apple slices. The next morning, the plate was gone. Clara set another. Days passed like this. A silent rhythm. A plate offered, then empty. A spoon placed neatly on top. Then one evening, Clara felt a shift. She turned and found Mina standing just inside the kitchen, eyes fixed on the pot. She didn't ask, just picked up a paring knife and started peeling a potato, her hands trembling. Clara watched her, said nothing, just nodded. Mina came back the next day and the next, always quiet, always watchful. She flinched at loud voices and ducked under tables when chairs scraped too hard. But in the kitchen, she stood taller. She listened, she learned. Clara taught her how to knead dough by feel, how to test broth with the back of the spoon, how to salt gently, like a whisper. The girl never smiled, but one morning she hummed, just a little tuneless while stirring grits, and Clara felt something rise in her chest that she hadn't named in years. Cole noticed, of course. He always did. One evening he passed by the kitchen, paused in the doorway, and met Clara's eyes. "She yours?" he asked. Clara didn't flinch. "No," she said, "but maybe I'm hers." He nodded once, then walked on. That night, Mina curled up in the corner of the kitchen with a blanket Clara had found in the storage closet. The wind howled through the town like a memory it couldn't shake, but inside the kitchen was warm. The stove crackled. The air smelled of cinnamon and butter. Clara sat at the table with a cup of tea, her hands wrapped around it like prayer. She watched the fire dance in the stove door and listened to Mina breathe. Outside, the town still didn't trust her, still looked twice when she walked past. But inside the dust horn there was the start of something soft. Not safety, not yet, but a kind of shelter. Built not from walls, but from heat, silence, and a girl peeling potatoes without fear. By late spring, the saloon smelled less like stale beer and more like home. Something in the air had shifted, not just inside the walls of the dust horn, but in the slow-breathing chest of the town itself. Word had spread, as it always did, not through posters or promises, but through scent. Clara's biscuits, her beef stew thick with bay and marrow, her apple crumble with just enough cinnamon to pull a man out of silence. People began arriving early, lingering after, inventing errands just to pass through the threshold. They didn't always speak to her. Some never did, but they left cleaner, straighter, somehow more human. On Sundays, Clara started serving lunches. She didn't ask Cole, just pinned a sheet to the front door. Meal at noon. Bring what you can, pay if you're able. The first week, 3 people came. One old rancher, a woman with a cough, and the preacher's wife. The next Sunday, there were 9. Then 15. Then too many chairs. She stretched the food thin, but it held. Mina learned to portion, to ladle without waste, to smile with her eyes. They worked in rhythm now, no longer teacher and student, but a pair of hands moving to the same unspoken melody. Cole built a second table from scraps of barnwood and laid it in the center of the saloon. No one mentioned it. It was just there one morning, like it had always belonged. The women in town began to take notice. Mrs. Darnell from the dry goods store brought a tin of paprika and fennel, left it with a nod. Mary Cutter, who hadn't left her porch since her husband vanished, came to help roll dough. She whispered once, "You remind me of my sister." Clara only nodded. The kitchen was too warm for grief. Outside the dust horn, the rest of New Penance stayed as hard as ever. Dust devils still danced in the road. Men still drank too much and looked too long. The mine still swallowed bodies, but inside something was being rewoven. A fragile net of care stretched across tables, ladled into bowls, baked into cornbread and forgiveness. Mina started talking more. Short sentences at first. "More flour. It's too hot. He smiled at you." Clara didn't ask who, but she knew. Cole had become part of the quiet orbit, fixing what broke, reinforcing what held. He never touched Clara, never crossed a line, but when he passed behind her, his hand brushed her back just once, barely a whisper, and something warm hummed beneath her ribs for the rest of the day. At night, Clara sat outside the saloon with her knees pulled to her chest, the stars sharp above her, the wind tugging gently at her braid. She thought of her mother, not just the bruises or the cries, but the hands that taught her to stir without splashing, to use onions when meat was scarce, to keep cooking no matter how hollow the house felt. Her mother's voice came back in fragments now, soft and dream-wrapped. "Feed them, Clara June, even the cruel ones. It'll shame them more than hunger." And maybe that's why, when the preacher's son threw a rock at the saloon window, a clean arc that shattered into silver teeth, Clara didn't yell. She walked outside, swept up the glass, and the next morning left a plate of cornbread and jam on the boy's porch. No note, no glare, just warmth wrapped in linen. He never did it again. The town still held its silence, still watched her like a wild thing trying to nest. But eyes softened. The old man at the stables tipped his hat. The teacher brought a jar of honey. The sheriff stopped calling her girl and started calling her ma'am. Mina drew a picture with charcoal and left it on the wall. 2 women, a stove, and something like sunlight in the corner. Clara hung it above the sink, and though she still locked the doors at night, still kept a hatchet under the flour bin. Something in her posture eased. She moved through the kitchen like it belonged to her, like she wasn't afraid to be seen. Like the dust horn, once filled with noise and dust and distance, had become something else entirely, a place that fed more than hunger. The day Ellis Crowley rode into New Penance, the wind changed. It blew from the north, sharp, bone-thin, carrying the scent of blood long dried and stories better left untold. The sun lost its edge. Horses grew uneasy. Even the dogs quieted. Clara was in the back room peeling turnips when she heard the saloon doors creak, slower than usual, like they'd been dared. The noise inside dimmed just a shade. Then a voice followed, low and thick with cruelty disguised as charm. "Still smells like sin in here, but warmer now. That you, Clara June?" Her knife stopped mid-slice. The turnip rolled off the counter and landed on the floor with a thud. She didn't move. Not at first. Just let the silence close around her like a noose. Her breath caught in her throat, shallow and stinging. Her body remembered faster than her mind. The way her hands used to tremble. The way her mother's sobs turned to whispers. The way the floorboards creaked beneath Ellis's boots at night. The feel of hiding under a table, counting breaths. The smell of kerosene on his coat. The sound of fists against wood. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped into the saloon. He was standing at the bar with his back turned, but she knew him from the slant of his shoulders, the way he leaned, like he owned the air around him. His hat was too clean, his boots polished. He turned slow, and when their eyes met, Clara's stomach clenched like a fist. He grinned. "Didn't think you'd land this well," he said. "Thought you'd end up in the river like your mama." The men in the saloon looked between them, confused, uneasy. Cole stood against the far wall, arms crossed, face unreadable. Mina was nowhere in sight. Clara didn't speak, just stepped behind the bar, reached for the rag, and wiped a clean glass until her hands stopped shaking. Ellis watched her, licked his lips like he was about to eat something. "Pour me a drink, sweetheart." She did, but her fingers didn't tremble when she set it down. She met his eyes and said, "Don't call me that." A few men chuckled nervously. Cole didn't move, but his eyes didn't leave Ellis once. That night, Clara double-barred the back door. She moved her cot from the storeroom to the kitchen and pulled Mina's pallet close. The girl didn't ask questions, just curled beside her like a barn cat and held her wrist while she slept. The wind scratched at the windows again like it had business there. Clara lay awake, her eyes open in the dark, listening for footsteps. The next morning, one of the barns outside town burned to the ground. The sheriff called it lightning. Clara knew better. She kept working, she kept baking, she kept smiling at the preacher's wife and slicing apples for the school children. But she also started watching shadows, measuring exits, listening for boots she hadn't invited in. Ellis came back every few days, sat at the same stool, ordered the same whiskey, called her names meant to cut. One evening he left a silver coin on the bar and said, "Shame about your mother. She had pretty wrists." Clara swept the coin into the stove ash that night and didn't speak for hours. The fear clawed up her throat like it had all those years ago. But this time, it didn't nest. It didn't stay. Because Cole began to stay longer in the saloon after closing, sitting near, but never too close. Mina began carrying a small knife on her hip. Not hidden, just there. The preacher's wife brought over a hammer one morning and said, "For the back window, needs reinforcing." No one said Ellis's name, but everyone seemed to know. And Clara. She was tired of silence, tired of hiding, tired of folding herself into corners so that men like Ellis could stand tall. So the next Sunday she stood at the front of the church and told them, "Not everything, just enough. My name is Clara June. Some of you know me for my biscuits, some for my quiet, but I had a mother who was beaten until she bled. And the man who did it walks your streets now, smiling like he's earned a place here." The church was silent. Then someone, a miner, stood up and said, "That ain't a man, that's rot." One by one, heads nodded. A few stayed seated, but Clara didn't watch them. She stepped down from the pulpit and walked back to the dust horn with her head high. That night, Cole handed her a fresh box of nails and said simply, "Back door's yours." After the church, the air shifted. Not in the way storms announce themselves, loud, wet, wild, but the way a wolf does, low and unseen, circling just beyond the firelight. Ellis Crowley didn't vanish. He didn't rage. He simply smiled wider, tipped his hat more often, laughed louder at things no one found funny. But there was something in his eyes now, a gleam that said, "Try me." Then the barn behind Gibbs's Mercantile burned down. It started at midnight. Flames painted the sky red as fever. By morning the store was still standing, but every crate of seed and dried goods was ash. The sheriff wrote it off again. Faulty lamp, careless hand. But Clara knew better. So did Gibbs. He didn't say so. But when he passed her outside the saloon 2 days later, he looked her in the eye for the first time and said, "You need sugar. You come by. No charge." That same afternoon, Mina found Clara's name etched into the charred fence post behind the store. Not carved carefully. Scratched, jagged, angry, deep enough to bleed wood. Mina didn't speak, just held it out. Clara read the 4 letters and felt heat rise behind her ribs. Not fear, not yet. Something harder. Something that could sharpen. That night she packed a bag. Just the essentials. Flour, a small skillet, her mother's worn locket. She folded Mina's nightgown and placed it gently on top. The child watched from the doorway, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "Where are we going?" Clara didn't lie. "I don't know." They stood there a long time in silence until a low voice came from behind them. "You run. He wins." Cole, barefoot, shirt loose, eyes soft but unwavering. Clara turned. "You think staying will stop him?" Cole shrugged. "I think leaving tells him you're still afraid." "I am." He stepped closer. "Then stay and be afraid. But stay." Her hands trembled, but she unpacked the bag. The next morning she didn't hide. She lit the stove early and filled the saloon with the scent of cinnamon and rising bread. She looked Ellis in the eye when he passed. She sang, softly under her breath, while she stirred. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She asked for help. She went door to door. The widow with 6 boys, the preacher's wife, the stable hand with the bad hip. She told them what Ellis had done, what he might still do. She didn't beg. She didn't dramatize. She simply said, "He's trying to break something I've built, and I think he'll keep trying unless someone other than me tells him no." Some said nothing. Some turned her away, but others listened. A few even nodded. On the following Sunday, the pews were fuller. And when Clara stepped up to speak again, just a few words, hands tucked into her apron, the crowd didn't stay silent. The blacksmith stood. "What do you need?" he asked. She blinked. "Flour, salt, a strong pair of hands." "I've got two," he said. That was how it began. Women came in shifts to help prep for Sunday meals, peeling, chopping, rolling dough. Men stayed later in the saloon, not drinking, just staying, watching the windows, keeping quiet watch. The preacher posted a small note outside the church. "We protect what feeds us." Mina started sleeping with her knife beside her, but she also began whittling little animals, foxes, owls, bears, and lining them up on the sill. She told Clara one night, "If they try to take the kitchen, we throw boiling soup in their faces." Clara laughed, the first real one in weeks. Cole, as always, said little. But one evening he placed a small hammer and a pouch of nails in Clara's hand and motioned toward the back wall. Together they nailed planks across the window, their hands brushing. They didn't speak of closeness, but it sat thick between them, the kind that didn't need naming. Ellis didn't disappear. He kept circling, kept smiling. But now when he looked through the saloon window, he saw more than Clara. He saw a town watching and waiting. They didn't call it a war. Folks in New Penance didn't like fancy words or loud claims, but there was no mistaking it. They were preparing for something. It hung in the air like dust before a stampede, this quiet urgency, this shared understanding that the ground beneath them was shifting. And at the center of it all stood Clara June, sleeves rolled, apron stained, voice low but steady, organizing a rebellion not with bullets but with bread, not with speeches but with firewood and lentils. She began in the saloon naturally. That was her terrain, the kitchen, the tables, the pantry she now stocked with precision and care. She took inventory of every sack, every spice tin, every scrap of cloth. She assigned tasks like a general. Mary Cutter and Darnell's daughter handled pickling and preserves. Mina boiled water, sharpened knives, counted spoons. Clara posted a schedule above the stove. Names, shifts, what to bring, what to do. No one argued. They just read it, nodded, and showed up. Cole offered the old barn behind his cabin. "It's dry," he said, and out of sight. Clara inspected it like a commander inspecting a post, walked the perimeter, tapped the beams, noted the creaky door. Would do. They moved supplies there at dusk, one cartload at a time. Blankets, lanterns, sacks of grain, rope. Someone brought a rifle. No one asked whose it was. The blacksmith, Calder, offered scrap metal. "For defense," he said. Clara didn't ask how. The man took 4 boys and started shaping fence posts into stakes. They lined the backs of wagons with them, sharp as warnings. Mina, quick with her hands and fierce with her eyes, began drawing chalk maps across the barn floor. "They'll come from the west," she said. "Always the west." No one argued. She was usually right. Clara noticed something strange. The more people gave, the more they stood taller. The widow who once mumbled now barked orders. The boy who used to steal pies now carried messages between houses. Even the preacher's wife laughed once, a quick, startled sound, like she'd forgotten she could. And through it all, Clara cooked, morning to dusk, her hands never idle. She made meals not just for eating but for courage, stews that lingered on the tongue, bread that filled the belly and calmed the nerves. Small things, but in these days, small things carried weight. Cole became her shadow, not hovering, never intruding, but there, fixing shutters, reinforcing locks, hauling crates. He didn't speak of feelings, didn't touch. But sometimes, after a long day, he'd hand her a cup of coffee and say, "You all right?" And she'd nod, not because she was, but because he asked. One evening, as they repaired the back fence, he told her about his brother, lost to a brawl in a border town, a man who laughed too loud and died too young. Clara didn't speak, just set a hand on his wrist for a moment. That was enough. Mina became fiercer by the day. She patrolled like a deputy, knife at her hip, eyes peeled. But at night she curled beside Clara and whispered stories she made up, about wolves that cooked stew and owls who stole boots. Her hands never left Clara's arm. "They won't take you," she said one night. Clara didn't ask who. She just kissed the girl's temple and said, "No, they won't." The town, once passive, became alert. Lanterns stayed lit longer. Men walked the perimeter. Women kept boiling water on the stove, just in case. They began to speak in shorthand, in glances, in half-nods that carried meaning. And they looked to Clara, not because she was loud or strong or born for leadership, but because she had stayed. Because when the fire came close, she didn't run. One afternoon, a boy burst into the saloon breathless. Strangers near the canyon, 4 of them, armed. Clara looked at Cole. He nodded once and stood. Mina whispered, "It's time." And so they gathered. No flag, no ceremony. Just hands, tools, quiet steps, and one woman in a flower-streaked apron standing at the head of it all. The wind picked up. The sky darkened at the edges. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Ellis Crowley smiled. But in New Penance, the people were ready. The day Ellis Crowley returned with guns, there was no trumpet, no dust storm, just stillness, the kind that makes even the grass hold its breath. It began at mid-morning, when Mina dropped the bowl she was drying and whispered, "They're here." Clara stepped onto the saloon's porch and saw them. 4 riders, faces shaded under low-brimmed hats, rifles slung, boots heavy with intention. Ellis led them. His horse moved slow, deliberate, as if it knew the town beneath its hooves had changed. He didn't speak at first, just rode straight to the well in the center of town and dismounted like he owned the dirt. His boots thudded with purpose. He glanced toward the saloon, toward Clara, then past her, at the windows filled with watchers. His voice, when it came, was smooth and oily. "I'm here for what's mine." The words echoed against wood and silence. A man, Hollis, the young blacksmith's nephew, stepped out from behind the general store. His voice cracked slightly, but it held. "Ain't nothing here for you, Crowley." Ellis smiled. "That's so." He motioned, and one of his men yanked a boy forward. Gibbs's youngest, no more than 10, his arm twisted in a grip too tight. The child whimpered. Ellis's voice turned hard. "You think you can stand behind a kitchen and keep me out? You think feeding folks makes you fireproof?" Clara stepped down from the porch. Slowly. Her boots touched the dirt, one after the other, each footfall louder than the last in the hush of that July morning. She walked into the center of the street, apron still on, flour still streaking her forearms. No weapon, no armor, just eyes steady and jaw firm. "You can let him go," she said, calm as river stones. "He's not part of this." Ellis tilted his head. "Neither were you, once." Behind her, doors opened, quietly, deliberately. From the saloon, the schoolhouse, the church, men and women stepped forward, not armed mostly, just present. Cole came last. From the side alley, rifle in his hand, not raised but ready. His eyes never left Ellis. The tension cracked like ice underfoot. "I ain't leaving without what I came for," Ellis said. "You humiliated me. You turned this flea-bitten town against me." Clara's voice didn't rise. "You did that all by yourself." Then came the sound no one mistook, a click, clean and precise. Mina, small and wiry, had climbed the roof of the mercantile, rifle in hand, barrel aimed, not shaking. Ellis's men shifted. One raised his gun, a shout, a shot, fired into the sky. It was Mina's, deliberate, sharp. The echo scattered birds, chaos broke, guns raised, people shouted, but no one fired again. Clara moved toward the boy, fast, grabbed him, yanked him back. Cole stepped forward, rifle leveled. Ellis, momentarily alone, looked around and saw what he hadn't expected. Unity. Townsfolk standing in doorways, on porches, behind carts. No one running. He turned to Clara. "You think you're better than me?" She stared at him, truly stared. Took in the scars, the sag of his jaw, the wildness in his eyes. "No," she said, "but I don't want to be you." He lunged. Cole's shot cracked through the air, not to kill, but to stop. It hit the ground at Ellis's feet. The outlaw stumbled, eyes wide. Before he could reach Clara, 4 hands grabbed him. Calder and the preacher, pinning him to the ground. He fought, spat, cursed, but he was on his knees. The sheriff arrived minutes later, breathless and red-faced. He hesitated. Everyone saw it. But Clara walked forward, dirt on her skirt, hands still shaking, and said, "Do your job." The sheriff looked at the crowd, then at her, and nodded. He took Ellis, shackled and snarling, and led him away. That night the saloon stayed open late. No one drank heavily. They sat, close and quiet. Clara served stew, hands steady now. Mina curled in a corner with her boots off, humming again. Cole sat beside Clara for a long time, their shoulders not quite touching, the silence between them thick with breath and heartbeat. Outside, the wind had gone still. Not safe, but still. The peace didn't last. It never does. Not in places like New Penance. Not in a land where the dirt remembers every boot, every scream, every crooked deal made under a sky that doesn't care. For 2 weeks, Clara walked a little lighter. She served breakfast with more smiles than caution. Mina stopped sleeping with her knife. Cole even repaired the front steps of the saloon, whistling low under his breath. It was the kind of quiet that makes you believe, just briefly, that the worst is behind you. Then word came. Ellis Crowley walked free, paid bail, claimed self-defense, claimed provocation, claimed everything but truth. The law, bent by wealth and fear, had snapped like a dry twig. The sheriff couldn't meet Clara's eyes when he delivered the news. He's gone south, crossed county lines, said he's done with this place. Clara didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She went inside, took off her apron, and laid it across the counter like it was a flag. Then she walked to the barn and began saddling a horse. Cole found her there. You know it's not your job to fix what men like him break? She tightened the cinch. He'll find another town, another girl. I won't let that happen. He watched her for a long moment, then reached for his saddle. No questions, no hesitation. Just a man choosing to stand beside her. Mina stormed into the barn like thunder. You're not leaving me here. Clara looked at her, this fierce little girl in patched boots and a too-big shirt, and knew there was no point arguing. And so they rode. The desert stretched before them, wide and hot and humming with silence. Days passed slow. They camped under stars so bright it hurt to look up. Mina caught lizards and made up songs about bandits. Cole rode ahead sometimes, quiet as smoke. Clara felt the weight of her purpose settle deeper with each mile. They followed rumors, whispers, a trail of half-truths and broken bottles. Ellis had headed south, that much was sure. A saloon burned in Riverton. A sheriff knocked out cold in Lark's Hollow. In every place, someone mentioned a man with a scar near his eye, and a mean laugh that never reached his teeth. Finally, in a border town called Sable Ridge, they found him. Clara recognized the horse first, that same black coat, that same chipped shoe she'd once repaired herself when she was a girl cleaning stables for food. The saloon it was tied to looked familiar too, loud, rough, smelling of rot gut and sweat. She left Mina with the horses, gave Cole a look that said, if I don't come out, and stepped through the swinging doors. Ellis sat at a poker table with 3 men and a woman on his lap. He was laughing, drunk or pretending to be. But when he saw her, Clara June, spine straight, dust on her boots, eyes calm as dusk, he stopped. Well now, he said, didn't think you'd come chasing. Clara didn't blink. I didn't come to chase. I came to end it. He stood, swayed, laughed again. You gonna shoot me, Clara June? Gonna be like your mama, all fire and no flame. She looked at the men around him. One frowned, one shifted uncomfortably. The woman leaned away. Clara spoke louder. This man beat a woman until her bones broke, burned barns, took a child hostage, lied under oath. You still proud to drink with him? One man stood, spat on the floor, walked out. Another followed. Ellis snarled, reached for his belt. Cole was faster, gun drawn, voice low. Try it. The local sheriff, who'd been drinking quietly in the corner, stood and ambled over. You Clara June? She nodded. I heard some things. He looked at Ellis. We don't take kindly to firebugs and child snatchers here. Ellis screamed, fought, but the sheriff had cuffs, and 2 deputies. This time the law didn't bend. Outside, Mina grinned when she saw Clara step out whole. That was fast. Clara didn't speak. Just mounted up, turned her horse north, and let the desert winds carry her toward home. They rode back into New Penance just as the sky broke open with spring rain, soft, soaking, the kind that settled into the bones of the earth and said, you can rest now. The town looked the same, but it felt different. Doors were painted, steps repaired. Even the church bell had been cleaned, its copper face gleaming like pride. As they passed, people stepped onto porches, nodded, lifted hands. Not out of politeness, but something deeper. Recognition. Clara June wasn't just the woman who fed them now. She was the one who stood and came back. She didn't make a speech, didn't explain where she'd gone. She just walked into the dust horn, untied her coat, and hung it on the same hook as before. Mina ran ahead, barefoot despite the mud, and started sweeping the front porch like she'd never stopped. Cole lingered outside, tying off the horses, but when he stepped inside and saw Clara setting the kettle, he exhaled, a long, slow breath that felt like home. That night, the fire in the stove burned low but steady. Clara made cornbread and beans with molasses, and the smell drifted out into the street like a welcome. She took her time stirring, not because she was tired, but because she could. There was no rush now, no looming shadow, just heat and hush and the steady clink of spoons against tin. Mina curled on the kitchen floor, scribbling in charcoal. "I'm making a new map," she said. "One with all the places we've been." Clara smiled. "Don't forget the place we came back to." Mina didn't look up. "I'm drawing it bigger." By the week's end, the Sunday lunches resumed. But they were different now, fuller, warmer, not just a meal, but a ritual. Families brought pies, jars of pickles, their own spoons. Clara stopped refusing help and started assigning it. Mary Cutter became the biscuit queen. Calder's niece stirred the gravy pot like it was holy work. Even the preacher's son, who once threw rocks at the saloon window, carried chairs and called Clara ma'am. The kitchen grew louder, laughter, clatter, the occasional song hummed without shame. Clara let it all in. She moved slower now, not from age or ache, but because there was no longer anything chasing her. She planted rosemary and thyme in crates beneath the saloon's front windows, painted the shutters white, let Mina carve a wooden sign to hang above the door. It read, "Clara's Table." She didn't cry when Cole hung it, but she gripped his arm as he came down the ladder, and for a long moment they just stood there, rain dripping from the eaves, hands still touching, silence rich and full between them. He didn't say anything. He never needed to. Some evenings they sat outside, side by side, sharing a pot of coffee or just the quiet. No declarations, no promises, just breath and presence. Sometimes Mina would appear in the doorway, her hair wild from play, cheeks flushed, asking if she could sleep outside under the stars. Clara would nod. Cole would build the fire, and all three would sit there while the flames crackled, letting the past fade into ash behind them. And though Ellis Crowley's name was still spoken sometimes, in warnings, in whispers, it no longer held weight. He had become just a chapter in a longer story, one Clara had turned the page on. One evening she found a small pile of letters on the bar, notes from women in nearby towns asking to visit, to learn, to help. Word had traveled. People wanted to cook with her, to hear how she did it. Not the stew, but the standing. She ran her fingers over the paper, looked out the window, and whispered, "All right, let's begin again." In the years that followed, Clara June's name became something like a prayer. Not the loud kind spoken in churches, but the quiet kind murmured while kneading dough or stitching up a hem. A name you said when things felt heavy, when the wind howled wrong, when the world forgot to be kind. Children who never saw the barn burn still pointed to the stove and said, "That's where she made the bread that saved us." Teen girls watched her stir stew and whispered, "That's how you do it." Soft hands, straight spine. And the old men who once spat on her name now waited every Sunday for her cornbread and a smile. But Clara never chased legacy. She chased presence. Mornings she walked the town slowly, a basket on her arm, stopping to smell the lilacs someone had coaxed into bloom along the fence. Shop doors opened early for her. People waved from rooftops. Children ran ahead to hold gates. She wasn't royalty. She was something better. She was real, rooted, a woman who had stayed. She started teaching, not in a schoolhouse, but in her kitchen. Girls came with flour on their cheeks and anger in their hearts. Widows came with trembling hands. Clara handed them knives and told them to start chopping. She didn't offer sermons. She offered space. "Use what you have," she'd say, "not what you wish for." Her voice was steady, her touch light. She showed them how to roll dough without tearing, how to taste with the tip of the tongue, how to feed people like you meant it. Mina, now taller, still fierce, took to writing stories in the margins of old ledgers. Tales of the battle, of Clara, of Cole, of a town that remembered how to fight. She ran the deliveries, sharpened the knives, and kept a slingshot in her apron for luck. When people asked if she was Clara's daughter, she'd grin and say, "I chose her." As for Cole, he never left. Never needed to. He fixed what broke, sat on the porch with coffee, carved spoons when the world got too loud. He and Clara didn't marry, not officially, but every soul in New Penance knew. They sat beside each other at every table, shared every quiet, held hands in storms. And when someone once asked Clara why they never wore rings, she said, "Because I don't need proof. I've got presence." She lit a lantern at dusk, every night, without fail. Just one, hung on the saloon's front beam. Promise, a beacon, a reminder that the kitchen was still warm, the bread still rising, and that no one had to eat alone. The story of Ellis Crowley faded. Eventually, folks stopped speaking of him altogether, not out of fear, out of irrelevance. What mattered was what came after. The rebuilding, the choosing to stay, the fire not of destruction, but of hearth. One spring evening, Clara stood at the edge of the garden she'd planted behind the saloon. Rosemary, sage, wild mint curling in clusters. She knelt, pressed her fingers into the soil, and smiled. Behind her, Mina laughed from the porch, a full sound, unafraid. Cole hammered something gently, whistling low. A pie cooled on the windowsill, and somewhere inside, bread began to rise. The wind stirred her hair and she closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of green things growing. She fed them, and they stood. Not because she fought, but because she stayed. And that was enough to change everything.